This is a testimony meeting, an informal meeting. And for those of you who've been listening, taking it in, have noticed that God has done something good for you in your life, we would love to hear from you on a Wednesday evening. For those of you that are, these testimonies are shared by teleconference. And now I'd like to open the meeting for testimonies. For those that are on the teleconference, make sure there's no noise where you are. Press *1 and listen for the acknowledgement message that your hand is raised. That lets us know that you're ready. And when we're ready here, we will call on you. And now I'd like to open the meeting to Testimonies of Healing by Christian Science.
Jim.
Okay, Jim from Arizona, go ahead.
I wish to express my gratitude for Christian Science. Early this week, I realized I needed some milk from the store, so I went over to the store, got in the car in shirt sleeves, and not thinking a bit about the weather. When I got to the store, I realized it was rather cool. And I did get a little bit chilled. I got home, and I checked the temperature. It was 41 degrees. And that was not necessarily shirt sleeve weather. The next morning, my nose was running something awful. And I called a practitioner, and I already had an idea what I would be assigned. And that was, I have cold in the prose works. And I read that twice. And was asked to reply in the afternoon, and I was happy to reply that my cold was nearly completed. And then I realized at 4:30 that afternoon, I hadn't had a sniffle, one little bit, for some time. So that in a very, very rapid healing of this supposed cold was taking place in a very effective manner. And I am most grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Craig from New Jersey.
Thank you. A while ago, doctors gave me a pretty dark picture. We can always know how we got to a point, but they had said that I had type 2 diabetes and that things were going to get bad. But I had been to church for quite some time, and I didn't believe it. Not that things weren't bad, but that I would get worse. Because I've always been helped when I turned to God and practitioners in this church. And I did. And I did get better and better. They couldn't explain it. And my eyesight, they kept sending me to the optometrist, check for retinal degeneration. And year after year, they couldn't find it. And I recently remember when I was a little fella, I used to pride myself on being able to walk around in the dark and not bump into things. And I can do it again. And it just made me feel so good, because in this church, I've seen so much healing, and there's always a healing when you just know and trust and listen to what you're given and what God's talking to you. It's such a wonderful atmosphere of unselfishness and sincerity, sweetness, and a spiritual atmosphere here, that every time I came, I felt freer, unburdened, and I felt like I was in the Spirit each day. And if I could be in the Spirit each day, it gave me confidence that at some point I'd be totally healed. And it's true. I feel great. And aggressive suggestion sometimes says otherwise, but we learn to knock it out and feel great again. I thank God for this Spirit.
Thank you.
Family.
Fairley from Maryland, go ahead.
I want to express my gratitude for all the Christian Science teaching that goes on at Plainfield. Bible study on Saturday, the round table on Sunday, and our practitioners' help and instruction. Soon after I came here, facing the onset of a head cold, my practitioner referred me to the article in Mary Baker Eddy's prose works, Miscellaneous Writings, page 239, I've Got Cold. I tried to work with that, but at that time, I still had a persistent cold that lasted longer than usual. The same thing happened the next year. But this year was different. I believe because the amount of time I have now had studying Christian Science at Plainfield. When I began to have unpleasant drainage in my nose a couple of weeks ago, I looked up the article and read it. When the child Mrs. Eddy speaks about says to the doctor, I've got cold, Mrs. Eddy points out, what if that sweet child so bravely confessing that she had something that she ought not to have and which Mama thought must be gotten rid of had been taught the value of saying even more bravely and believing it, I have not got cold. This time, I simply stated for myself whenever I felt a problem, I have not got cold. And the symptoms soon stopped, never developing into a cold. And I perceived that I had a clearer understanding of my spiritual selfhood and had gained more freedom from any such claim. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy, New Jersey.
When I was young, my dad taught me the fine art of the cob job. If something broke, we would use a hammer, vice grips, and a screwdriver to make it work again. As the years passed, I began to feel like this was a metaphor for me, never the right tool for the job. Even in my adult years, it seemed like I was always a temporary fix for the situations I found myself in. The first article my practitioner gave me was Mary Baker Eddy's Place. That article spoke to me, but in that low state, I felt the place waiting for me would reflect how low I was. I felt like I was. Because of that, I was uncomfortable being in Plainfield at first, as the people here had devoted so much to this cause and seemed so fitted for this place. I, on the other hand, was so broken. How could this place have been waiting for me? They aren't looking for a temporary fix. I thank God often because the people here built a bridge to me, to the place I was at, and helped me to cross it so that I could be where I needed to do the work for God I was sent to do. To me, that is the beauty of this church. They don't just shoot truth at people like a cannon. They make it relatable, knowing there is belief to be overcome. Jesus understood the power of making truth relatable. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taught in parables. Mrs. Eddy understood because she gave us writings that speak to the states we are in. And she gave us these wonderful testimony meetings to share with each other as we progress. The joy that I have now, finally feeling like the right tool for the job, is amazing. I love being useful to God. I am so grateful to God for having a place for me. I had and still have much to overcome, yet without these teachings, daily practitioner help, and the support of every church member, I don't know where I'd be. I do know one thing: Christian Science is the permanent fix I needed in order to find my place.
Thank you. The Moores from Georgia, go ahead.
Thanks, Bruce. This is Lenny. I just wanted to express my gratitude tonight for the, I guess it's sort of like the final period in a chapter or in a healing that took place recently. A few weeks ago, I had testified about a situation at work, and I had given my gratitude for the ability that I felt, this God-given ability that I was experiencing to be able to stand up for principle and stand for what was right at work, even if it was uncomfortable or, even if no one else wanted to do it. And after that situation, I also had to have the trust, as the hymn, the beginning hymn said about trusting the eternal. I had the trust to put the situation in God's hands, as we're taught in this church, where you give it to God, and it's healed or it's removed, and trust that He is taking care of the event. And sure enough, in this particular situation where I had kind of a run-in with a particular person, the whole situation has completely harmonized at this point. A new person was hired. The old person is still there, but there's a new person who's been hired who is, for lack of a better word, kind of a buffer person now, and is doing a very good job at jumping in and kind of taking over a particular function, so that I don't need to interact with this person. And even in general, even without this new person, things with this other gentleman have really quieted right down. So I was thinking tonight, I was very grateful to God for, taking care of that, and also just in general grateful to this church for how it's teaching me to stand up and do what I need to do, and then also be able to step back and trust and know that God is going to and does govern every event that concerns me. I'm very grateful tonight for the amazing readings, all the wonderful testimonies, and I continue to be grateful for practitioner support every day in helping me with all the little and big things that come along. Thank you all.
Thank you. From Georgia, go ahead.
Tonight, I'd like to give gratitude for Christian Science, for how it has gradually brought me out of darkness into a light I can consistently follow. For so long, I was a miserable, anxious person, often not knowing exactly what I was anxious about. If anyone has suffered from anxiety, they must understand the misery it involves, not wanting to wake up at times and fearful from day to day. Through Christian Science and the practical way it shows how to apply its teaching, as taught here in this church, I started to understand that these fears were not mine. They were not powerful, and they had no control over me. Yes, it took me quite a while to understand some of its concepts, but once understood, there were things that I could really practice. For example, I learned that when I see old age, for example, I do not have to accept it. I can know the truth about it right there and then. When I hear an ambulance or the fire truck, I can know the truth about all of these things. In these small practical ways, God has shown me how to correct my thinking about man, the perfect man that He has created. And living this way, to bless man and to serve God, has changed my life completely. It has given me a purposeful way to live. It has brought me more peace, greater than any peace I could have ever had from any source. And I am so grateful, forever grateful, for this change in how I live. I thank God for giving this science to Mrs. Eddie, and for her way, the struggle she went through to give this salvation to all of mankind. Thank you.
Thank you. The Moores from Georgia, go ahead.
Thank you. This is Tony. I want to give my gratitude for the help I've been getting from a practitioner in this church. Really been casting off this idea of dualism, and it has come from the culture. And we talk about the culture. That's people who've grown up in Christian Science and have basically been taught improperly. We talk about this quite a bit on the roundtable, so I don't need to go into that. But this idea of dualism kind of kept creeping in with me, and he spotted this, and he told me that I only have one job. There's only one work for me, for us all. It's not like, okay, well, I'm going to be spiritual now at this point, or I'm going to go to my job and do that job, and then later I've got, work for God, or, I was kind of like separating things. You don't separate things. There's only one. We only have one purpose, and it's different for all of us, but we are, as we know in Christian Science, we are working to help others, and that's our job. So even though I have employment, my job is to help people. So along this idea of casting off this dualism, I was mentioning that there were some challenges at work, that we had these sales, apparently like a sales cycle where things were kind of trending down, and I didn't want to have to spend a lot of my time worrying about that. And he said, basically, when you put the things of God first, God will add all the other things unto you. And it's also in the watching point this week by Gilbert Carpenter, talking about in doing God's work, you can't lack any proper expression of activity or abundance. And he brought this to my attention. And I acknowledge that. I've got a lot of these concepts kind of in my mind now that I'm living with. And sure enough, putting the work of God first this week, I can report that today was a very good day at work, and not for me necessarily, but for many other people in the company. And that was what was that's what I really was hoping for. And I was so grateful to see this principle of God in operation for everything in my sphere of thought. It wasn't just isolated to me. It was for everyone, and that was, part of my thought. So very, very grateful for that clear, strong teaching, and great service tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Chardell from Pennsylvania, go ahead.
Good evening. It may get noisy here, so I'm going to be fast. I thought I would miss the service tonight, and I haven't so far. And I have to express my gratitude for all of Plainfield. I had no idea that the spiritual awakening could be so transforming. It's miraculous and supremely natural, as Mrs. Eddy has said. Everything. Everybody who testified tonight spoke for me. And all of the readings were so beautifully astounding and so meaningful to me and to everyone. I am so grateful for our practitioners, for every single person at Plainfield and beyond. I thank you so much. I am filled with gratitude.
Thank you. Gary, New Jersey.
My wife and I moved to Plainfield many years ago from California because there was a Christian Science practitioner in this church who healed. And shortly after we moved here and started attending this church, one Sunday during the service, a woman, a member of this church, had a stroke and passed on in the service. And the practitioner that we came here to work with and to study with got up and gently, quietly walked down and sat next to that woman. and spoken to her ear, "God is your life." And she repeated that. And there was a power, a presence in the service. Within 2 minutes, the woman who was gone woke up. She was able to stand and sing the next hymn. And by the end of the service, she was completely healed, and there was no trace of that stroke that she had suffered during the service. And she went on for several years after that to faithfully serve this church. That was the first experience I had seen that showed me what Mrs. Eddy meant when she said that death is not real, that life alone is real. I have learned so much and gained so much from the study of Christian Science in this church and with the help of that practitioner and other practitioners since then, that I can't be grateful enough for God sending me to this church and providing Christian Science, and for Mary Baker Eddy for providing Christian Science to the world.
Thank you. I'd like to add my thanks tonight. I was looking at our website, and I was going through the articles that are in the carousel, and there's one there called Gratitude by Herbert Eustace. And it talked about a man who found in his church an old prayer book. He opened it up and looked, and there were a lot of prayers in that book which were asking God to give them the things that they desired. And there was a lot of evidence that those prayers were used quite a bit in their church. And there are many other prayers that were simply gratitude to God, thanks to God for his blessings. And it seemed like those prayers weren't used so often. And Mr. Eustace went on to say that it shouldn't be that way. It should be more gratitude and praise to God, and not so much, give me the things that I want, please. And it really struck a note with me, because that's really a story of my life, quite frankly. Before I came to this church, I did have quite a great need, but my mode of going about things were complaining about the things that I didn't have and fear about not having them. Thank God he brought me to this church, and I started on a new path. And after some time being on that path, I felt like I was living in the land of opportunity and finding myself just thanking God and praising him. But this didn't come quickly, or I had to learn many lessons. And the main lesson was to stop thinking about myself so much and start thinking more about God, praising him, learning more about him, and following him as best as I saw the light. Even if I saw that light very dimly or not well at all, at least follow it to the best of my ability. And to this day still, I need a better picture of that guiding light. But it's a wonderful path to be on. So I went from the land of complaining to the land of opportunity. This land of opportunity is everywhere. God is omnipresent. And with a little more praises and thanks to God, it can lift the veil of whatever picture error would like to throw at us and give you a better picture of what is there already. God's perfection, perfect man, perfect God, perfect man, perfect universe as the basis of our thought and demonstration. I'm so grateful for that article, because it reminded me of something that I needed and still need, and has been proved to be very helpful for me.
Recently, there was a calendar statement that said, God's law, the law of good. Alone is operating and forever blesses man, by Milton Simon. This has been so helpful to me with all the negativity in the world and all the beliefs of mortal mind. I can use this because if it's not good, it's not God's law. And that means I can apply the truth and annihilate the error or the lie, the false belief. This has been so helpful to me. In the office, if things get a little heavy, I just go aside and just take this and think of God's law, the law of good, and it forever blesses man. I am so grateful for all that we have in this church, for the teaching, for the round tables, the Bible studies, and for all the people all over the world, our family of God. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a letter to read tonight from Wisconsin. I just finished watching and listening on YouTube to the song Why by Peter and Faith and was reminded of what had originally drawn me to the Plainfield Independent Christian Science Church. Several years ago, I was doing a Google search for Christian Science, and I stumbled upon your site. The music section was just what I needed at the time. With my computer in hand, I was soon cooking and cleaning while listening and singing to the wonderful songs performed at that time by the quartet. Never had I found a Christian Science church that allowed such music. Over the next year, I followed what you were doing and saying on the internet through the Bible studies, roundtables, and all the wonderful readings. Soon I knew I had found a home, true Christian Science, as Mary Baker Eddy had given it to the world. I would like to give special thanks to my dedicated practitioner. She has taught me many things, including getting rid of pride and a better sense of who and what God is, and feeling His presence, and learning to humbly turn to Him in prayer. Thank you all for the hard work you have all done and are continuing to do to keep this church on a forward path. We all have, at times, decisions to make in life. Usually during the day you have many decisions, what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat, just simple things. And if you practice prayer at that time, turning to God each moment, listening for His voice as to what to do and when to do it, when you have bigger decisions to make, it becomes easier. You can feel what He's saying. You can feel the urge or the impulse to do or not to do something. Sometimes it's true, it can be more difficult. I've heard many people ask, well, how do you know it's really God's voice? And sometimes it can feel like maybe you're even paralyzed by indecision. And I found something that was very helpful. I've known it, but I found where it was from. It's Adam Dickey's Memoirs of Mrs. Eddy, Mary Baker Eddy, and she tells him, sometimes people say I am changeable, that I change my mind frequently. I do change my mind frequently, but when I do, it is always God that changes me. Sometimes I will be headed in one direction like a weather vane, and will stay that way for several days. The next time you see me, and I have turned completely around and am going the other way. But in the meantime, God has given me additional light and has led me to make the change. There have been times in working out a problem when I have not known just what step to take, and finding necessary to make a move of some sort. I have taken a step as nearly as I could in the right direction. Perhaps I would find out shortly that it was wrong, but this step gave me a new point of view that I would not have had I not taken it as I did. I would not condemn myself, therefore, what seemed to be a mistake, but would include it as part of working out the problem. I found this so helpful. If you have a decision, you're not quite sure, you take the best step you can. You pray and do the best you can. Go in one direction. You'll get light enough to take one step and maybe one step more. or maybe you'll get a red flag that tells you to go back. But God will be speaking, and whatever you learn, it will be through his guidance, and you will be better than before. If Mrs. Eddy at times wasn't sure what to do, I can't certainly feel badly if sometimes I'm not certain what to do, but be so grateful that she was this wonderful example. She lived this science, and thank God we have these records of how she lived it, so we can follow that example. I'm so grateful for this church. I'm grateful for the wonderful readings we heard tonight, for the testimonies, and I would just like to end with Proverbs 3, which goes along with what I was saying. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths.
Thank you.